Moscow's plans to occupy Ukrainian lands were interrupted by the West's support of Kiev. For this reason, the Russian administration both wants to escalate the war in order to find a way out and tries to intimidate Western Europe to prevent military and financial support to Kiev against the risky actions of the Russians in the Baltics, the North Atlantic, the Irish Sea, and the North Sea. The NATO alliance is on the alert. The United Kingdom is making critical moves, especially for the safety of this 1,200-kilometer pipeline, which starts near St. Petersburg and passes under the Baltic Sea and reaches Germany. Because the United Kingdom also has submarine cables and important connection tools for telecommunication on this strategic pipeline. Although the UK has an interest in the Nord Stream pipeline, Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Medvedev, the former president of Russia, shared reports that he claimed the West was responsible for the explosion in the pipeline. Also in his Telegram statement, Medvedev highlighted the alleged evidence that Russia has exposed the West's interference in crucial energy infrastructure to justify potential excessive retaliatory measures against the West. Russian Security Council Vice Chairman Dmitry Medvedev accused Western countries and especially the UK of undermining the Nord Stream project and further increasing tensions between Russia and the West. Medvedev surprised even Russian leader Vladimir Putin by claiming that the UK was also responsible for the explosions in Nord Stream. Dmitry Medvedev made a crazy rhetoric by stating that the UK's submarine connecting cables and telecommunications vehicles should be targeted on the Nord Stream pipeline. As crazy as these statements sound, Putin's spokesman has officially declared that the UK should be openly targeted with these statements, which stunned even Vladimir Putin. It is clear that Medvedev forgot the rules of international politics. Although Russia itself was blamed for this explosion, Medvedev was actually trying to cause a crisis in the international political and diplomatic arena by using the mysterious situations in the pipeline. But there's one detail that the former Russian president forgot: if his rhetoric continues to be dangerous and provocative, just like the Russian Navy, the UK's naval forces, warships, submarines, and many more deterrent military elements are active in the Baltics, the North Sea, and many strategic naval areas. In other words, with these critical statements, Medvedev can stay under the submarine stallions of the UK. Already, the former Russian president has declared that British politicians have now become a legitimate military target for Moscow after UK Foreign Secretary James Cleverly asserted that Ukraine has the right to use force within Russia's borders. Cleverly, in response, declared Ukraine's right to send forces beyond its borders as part of its self-defense following a series of drone strikes that hit Moscow's wealthiest neighborhoods. Now, the conflicts between the two seems to escalate after Medvedev's ludicrous statements that the UK connecting cables on the Nord Stream pipeline should be targeted because Medvedev seems to continue his threatening policies. Meanwhile, Medvedev's threat to target UK submarine cables adds a new layer of complexity to the ongoing tension between Russia and the Western world. This raises concerns about the potential escalation of war, and in an interconnected world, critical infrastructure is now much more at risk. Currently, the Nord Stream pipeline, a major energy project designed to transport natural gas from Russia to Western Europe, has long been the subject of geopolitical contention. Although Medvedev's threatening comments are considered utopian, doubts about the safety of this pipeline have increased in recent days due to some dangerous actions by the Russians. NATO officials have expressed doubts that Europe's crucial underwater infrastructure is at stake, fearing that Russia could sabotage deep-sea pipelines to punish Western nations for Putin's support of Ukraine. In response to attacks on the Nord Stream pipeline in September 2022, which damaged 3 of the 4 main lines carrying gas from Russia to Germany, the NATO alliance is stepping up its efforts to protect submarine pipes and cables. An estimated $10 trillion worth of financial transactions pass through the cables of the underwater infrastructure every day, and this line is crucial to the economy. But these days, important marine areas where the Nord Stream is located are in danger. Concerns have risen these days that Russia may target submarine cables and other critical infrastructure in order to disrupt Western life, in order to gain an advantage over the nations that provide security to Ukraine. That's why the NATO bloc established the Critical Submarine Infrastructure Coordination Cell in February to monitor Russian espionage led by Lieutenant General Hans Werner, a retired German military officer, over concerns about the potential for power outages. Therefore, the Critical Submarine Infrastructure Coordination Cell is seen as a deterrent against the risky actions of the Russians. British Defense Secretary Ben Wallace has reported in recent days that Russian submarines are sailing on bizarre routes that deviate from what is considered typical by Western defense officials. Wallace noted the growing indications of Russian submarines operating off the coast of the United States and the Mediterranean, which appear to be Soviet-style submarine deployments reminiscent of the Cold War. Russian state media reported earlier this year that a new submarine division carrying nuclear-capable Poseidon super torpedoes for the Pacific Fleet will be installed as early as next year. According to the non-profit Nuclear Threat Initiative, in recent years, Russia has tried to upgrade its submarine fleet, as a result of which the Russian Navy has about 58 ships. Among them, some Russian submarines were reported to be circling the British coasts. For this reason, UK Defense Secretary Ben Wallace states that the NATO alliance should be on the alert at all times against Russian submarines. So the West is still worried about a possible conflict with the Russian submarine fleet. As part of the ongoing exercise, NATO countries are being trained to monitor submarines to prevent possible attacks on underwater infrastructures such as cables and gas pipelines. In addition, NATO's military exercises are constantly continuing against the risky maneuvers of the Russian navies in the aforementioned sea areas. The 12-day military exercise, in which 12 NATO allies participated, focused on tracking down an alleged enemy submarine off the coast of Norway and Iceland. Despite NATO's military exercises, Russian submarines could potentially disrupt the security of commercial shipping or attempt to cut off military routes from which the United States supplies equipment and weapons to Europe. There is also the danger of Russian forces sabotaging submarine cables used to transmit data and electricity. For this reason, these critical measures taken by NATO and military exercises must increasingly continue, both in the Baltics and in strategic areas such as the North Sea, Irish Sea, UK coasts, and the Atlantic. David Kotler, NATO Deputy Secretary General for Intelligence and Security, reported that NATO ships patrol the Atlantic more frequently than in previous years and that activities in the North and Baltic Seas are increasing. Mr. Kotler also warned that the enormous strategic benefit of being able to interfere with the West's energy, internet, and banking systems has drawn the attention of NATO's enemies, also due to the concern of such attacks. Poland is strengthening the military protection of its maritime energy infrastructure. The Polish government has passed a bill that gives the military the ability to sink an enemy ship if it poses a threat to an important gas pipeline from Norway to the Baltic Sea. The potential destruction of the vital undersea cables that Medvedev spoke of could have serious consequences for global telecommunications and internet connectivity. In addition, such a move could disrupt international communication networks, affecting businesses, governments, and individuals worldwide. But there was another interesting side to Medvedev's statements. The former Russian president blamed the West for the explosions in the Nord Stream pipelines. However, a few days before the explosions, interesting situations had occurred on the pipeline. The Danish Ministry of Defense reported that the Russian special ship SS-750, carrying a mini-submarine for deep-sea operations, was near the Nord Stream gas pipeline for days before the sabotage. The SS-750 is a ship designed for underwater operations and equipped with deep-sea equipment. It was photographed by a Danish patrol boat on September 22 of last year. The photos were not made public as they were part of an ongoing reconnaissance mission. Jakob Kastberg, an expert of the European Analytical Center and a senior military intelligence, described the appearance of the SS-750 as interesting in the context of the investigation, since such a ship could carry out an operation. The investigation by the Danish Ministry of Defense also reported that Russia covered up the operation to blow up the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines with the maneuvers of its fleet, and that a small submarine could be used to transport explosives directly. In summary, almost all the countries of the world are struggling for a single purpose in order to suppress the negative policies of the Ukraine invasion, which Russia is trying to spread. Even if Russia tries to use risk policy strategies, in this regard, the New World Order is too important to be left to Medvedev or any Russian bureaucrat who cannot think clearly. Russia is experiencing the worst days in its history. The overconfident Russian army is about to fall apart. The Russian army is completely out of order. If the problems in the army are not solved, Russia may soon be forced to withdraw completely from Ukraine. So how did the Russian army become like this? What is happening in Russia? To answer these questions, we need to take a closer look at the structure of the Russian army. First, let us take a look at the available data. The Russian army has over 1 million active and 2 million reserve personnel. This makes Russia the second largest military power in the world. However, it has recently become clear that the larger size of the Russian army does not make it a stronger army. It is very difficult to control such a large number of soldiers. There are many reasons for this. First, there are many mercenaries in the Russian army. There is constant tension between the mercenaries and the Russian army and the conscripted citizens. Mercenaries have many privileges, especially the Wagner Group to which these soldiers belong is one of the most important institutions that deepen the crisis. The Wagner Group is one of the biggest companies in Russia. Prigozhin, the head of the company, had a deep influence on Russian politics. That's why Wagner Group soldiers do not listen to the orders of Russian commanders and cause many problems within the army. Soldiers of the Wagner Group do not participate in any of the operations in risky areas. These areas are manned by Russian soldiers who were recruited by force. Russian soldiers are very angry with the commanders and the Wagner Group because of this situation. On the other hand, most officers in the Russian army have not been paid for months. However, the soldiers of the Wagner Group always receive a high amount of payment. There is a crisis between the Russian officers and the soldiers of the Wagner Group due to this problem. Moreover, many of the soldiers in the Russian army come from different ethnic backgrounds. There are 22 autonomous republics in the Russian Federation. These regions are mostly populated by minorities. Citizens living in minority regions are forcibly recruited into the army. This situation causes the crisis in the Russian army to increase. One of the biggest problems in Russia is racism, as the Russian army brings together soldiers of many different races. Racism rises to higher levels. The tension between Russian commanders and soldiers from minority regions is increasing day by day. After this attitude of Russian commanders, many revolts started in the Russian army. Especially soldiers from Chechnya and Dagestan caused great damage to the Russian army. Russia dismissed the commanders who could not suppress these rebellions. As a result of the dismissal of the commanders, the hierarchical order in the Russian army was severely damaged. But these were not the main problems in the Russian army. The Russian army is struggling with a much bigger crisis. Russian soldiers have started to surrender en masse. After this move of the Russian soldiers, the Kremlin was helpless. So why are Russian soldiers surrendering? There are dozens of reasons for the surrender of Russian troops, but one thing is certain: it is because of the great success of the Ukrainian army. Russian troops are suffering a heavy defeat in Ukraine. The death toll in the Russian army is close to 100,000. Fear is growing among Russian soldiers because of these heavy losses. Russian soldiers don't believe they can win this war, so they plan to end this war by surrendering. and the soldiers in the Russian army know that their lives are not cared for. Russian soldiers are being sent to die in Ukraine. Russian soldiers are saying we don't want to die for Putin. Anti-war protesters in Russia are also supporting this rebellion. Russian citizens are saying this is Putin's war, not ours. The crisis in the Russian army do not end there. Having suffered a major defeat in Ukraine, Russia has sent troops and militants from many other regions to the region. Armed groups that Russia has supported in Syria for years have been sent to Ukraine. In addition, many militants from Afghanistan and Iran are fighting in this region. None of these fighters have professional army training. That's why they cannot conduct regular operations and coordinate in a professional manner. This disrupts the entire organization of the Russian army. There are terrorist groups and mercenaries in the Russian army. At the same time, with so many different groups, a new problem arises in the Russian army every day. There have been dozens of reports of Russian soldiers trying to escape from the army, but most of the soldiers who fled the war were captured by the Russian army. The deserters had nowhere to go. Russian soldiers found an interesting solution. An incident in the Kherson region completely changed the course of the war. After the increased operations of the Ukrainian army, soldiers at a Russian base in Kherson raised a white flag and surrendered. The surrendered soldiers were taken to a center by the Ukrainian army. They were identified and then given new clothes and hot meals in a special dormitory was prepared for the surrendered Russian soldiers. This made the soldiers very happy. The Russian soldiers who surrendered wanted to share their experiences with their friends serving in the army. The Russian soldiers made a video and told everything they went through. In this video, a call was made for other Russian soldiers to surrender as well. This video attracted great attention in the Russian army in a short time. Speaking in the video, Russian soldiers said they were treated very well here. The soldiers said everything here is better than in the Russian army. They gave us hot food, new clothes, and comfortable beds. Moreover, our safety is not in danger. This speech by the Russian soldier was soon shared in Telegram groups. Most of the soldiers in the Russian army decided to surrender immediately after this event. Russian soldiers began to surrender in many bases. In this way, the Ukrainian army managed to liberate many towns without any fighting. The surrender of Russian soldiers raising the white flag caused a crisis in the Russian army. Russian commanders tried many methods to prevent the soldiers from surrendering, but without success. Many Russian commanders were then dismissed. This situation increased the tension in the Russian army. By surrendering, Russian soldiers have done enormous damage to Russia's reputation. The Russian government is making great efforts to prevent the soldiers from surrendering. The Russian press is not publishing any footage of the soldiers surrendering. Putin is allegedly very angry about this. The Ukrainian government is implementing very determined policies on this issue. Images of Russian soldiers surrendering are frequently shared. The Ukrainian army uses drones to record the moments when Russian soldiers surrender. These images are shared on social media accounts of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. The Putin administration was making a great effort to prevent these images, but an incident in Ukraine thwarted all Putin's plans. This interesting story changed the course of the war. Surrendered Russian soldiers met with the mothers of soldiers serving in the Ukrainian army. The mothers of the soldiers served the Russian soldiers the food they cooked. Ukrainian mothers thanked the surrendered soldiers for not continuing this war. At this moment, a Russian soldier became very emotional and started to cry. The Ukrainian mother hugged the Russian soldier and began to console him. The Russian soldier said that he wanted to go home and that this war had to end. Then the Ukrainian mother did something that surprised everyone. The Ukrainian mother decided to make a video call to the Russian soldier's mother. She asked the Russian soldier for his mother's phone number. Thanks to this call, the soldier who saw his mother experienced great joy. There was a very emotional conversation between the Ukrainian mother and the Russian mother. This conversation affected everyone very much. Everyone in Russia who opposed this war respected the solidarity of the mothers. The surrender of soldiers in the Russian army was one of the most important events that changed the course of this war. In fact, this was a very successful policy of the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian people always tried to help the Russian soldiers who did not want to fight but were forced into the army. Russian soldiers who surrendered were always treated well. Ukraine's leader, Zelensky, changed the course of the war thanks to his critical decisions. Zelensky, who is an expert in influencing people, managed to influence the whole world in this war. What are your thoughts on the surrender of Russian soldiers? Do you think Russian soldiers will continue to surrender? How does the surrender of Russian soldiers affect the course of the war? The last year of the world's history has been spent dealing with a very tense and major crises due to the effects of the Ukraine war. While the tension of the Ukrainian war was felt even in the most remote corners of the world, the tensions in the South China Sea began to become equivalent to the Ukrainian war. The Chinese government's statement that it has a historical right in the South China Sea and that the sea is completely under Chinese control caused many disagreements between the countries of the region and China. Philippines is ignoring China's dominant position on the South China Sea, both with its years-long partnership with the USA and its claims in the South China Sea. This is a situation that causes China to experience tensions with the Philippines after Taiwan. Here in this video, we will show you the tension between China and the Philippines. Let's examine the recent events in the South China Sea and the consequences of these events together. The Philippines Coast Guard, aka PCG, said 2 of its ships were involved in a conflict with the Chinese Navy in the South China Sea. The Philippines Coast Guard has accused the China Coast Guard, aka CCG, of performing dangerous maneuvers on Second Thomas Shoal, a long-standing point of contention between the two countries. PCG said in a statement yesterday that the first incident occurred when a Chinese Navy ship crossed paths with Coast Guard boats 7 nautical miles from Pagaso Island. The reef on the disputed Spratly Islands, also known as Thitu Island, was occupied by the Philippines in the 1970s and is now home to some 400 people. The Coast Guard said the conflict began when the Chinese corvette ordered the PCG ships to leave and suggested that failure to comply could cause problems. In the statement, it was said that the PCG ships did not back down and responded by asserting their right to operate in the territorial waters of Pagaso Island and asked the Chinese Navy to leave. The second incident occurred 2 days later, near Second Thomas Shoal, known as Ainin Shoal in the Philippines. In the PCG statement, it was said that the PCG ships were intercepted by 2 CCG ships displaying offensive tactics. It was reported that one of the Chinese ships made dangerous maneuvers and kept the dangerous distance of only 50 yards. This proximity posed a significant threat to the safety and security of the Philippine ship and crew. The second incident occurred when PCG was showing several journalists around the area. China claims almost all of the South China Sea, and China continues to ignore the international court's decision that China's claim has no historical basis. According to some foreign policy experts, the resolution also found that China's actions violated several articles of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, namely on clause regarding safety and navigation at sea. Following the events at Scarborough Shoal, 2012, despite the decision in 2016, Beijing continues to expand and develop military outposts and deploy fishing fleets, naval militias, and coast guards to defend its claim in the South China Sea. The PCG statement said its ships encountered more than 100 Chinese naval militia ships during a week-long, shallow, and outpost patrol around the West Philippine Sea. Taiwan also has claims in the South China Sea alongside China and the Philippines, as well as states such as Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei. Last February, the Philippines accused China of using a powerful laser against one of its ships aboard the Second Thomas Shoal and staged the protest. The herd is located approximately 195 kilometers northwest of the Philippines, Palawan Province, in the disputed Spratly Islands and is home to a small group of Filipino soldiers living on a arrested World War II ship known as the Sierra Madre. The troop group was deliberately grounded here in 1999 to highlight the Philippines' claim to the island chain. CCG patrols also engaged in serious conflict with Vietnamese ships last month near Vietnam's key gas and oil fields, according to the Asian Maritime Transparency Initiative. Manila and Beijing counterclaim in the disputed South China Sea, where tensions continue between their maritime neighbors. Beijing claimed that Manila ships had allegedly entered its waters. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs made serious statements and showed strong dissatisfaction with the Chinese Philippine Coast Guard vessels not entering the waters of the Ranai Reef. According to China, the barge entry of Philippine ships into the waters of the Rhine Reef with journalists was a premeditated and provocative act. The Philippines was deliberately aimed at finding fault with China and exaggerating a possible event, Beijing said, urging Manila to respect China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests in the South China Sea. The incident occurred while Chinese Foreign Minister Chen Guan was visiting Manila last week. The Philippines has a tense stance not only against China, but also towards its ally, the United States. The Philippines recently said it would not allow the United States to stockpile weapons at joint military bases in the Philippines for use in operations in Taiwan. The Philippine Foreign Minister said in a session in the Senate that the Philippines will not allow the U.S. to stockpile weapons in areas accessible to U.S. troops under a 2014 defense agreement between Manila and Washington for use in operations in Taiwan. Their comments came after Manila approved 4 more military bases for joint use with Washington under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or EDCA, signed in 2014. Whether Manila will allow the United States to store weapons at certain points in the country will be determined by the main objectives of the defense agreement, the ministry said. The Philippine Senate Foreign Relations Committee was responding to the U.S. National Defense Authorization Act of 2023, which allowed the contingency to be created while pointing to the possibility of the U.S. storing weapons at EDCA facilities in the Philippines. Filipino officials said we will not accept any activity or even material that is not consistent with these agreed-upon activities. In our view, EDCA is not targeting any third country. As for the purpose of EDCA and the modernization of the military, it seems to us that in fact modernization is no longer the primary purpose of the EDCA. The primary purpose seems to be disaster preparedness, maritime security, and counterterrorism, Filipino officials said. Earlier this month, Manila announced 4 new military bases for joint use with the United States under the EDCA. It drew the anger of China, which warned of further tensions in the region and urged neighboring countries to make regional stability and choices in their own interests. Currently, Manila and Washington jointly manage 5 bases under the EDCA that allow for the deployment of U.S. troops to various locations in the Philippines. The Philippines agreed last January to allow the U.S. military access to 4 more military bases, which would increase the number of bases in the country to 9. EDCA, a military agreement signed between Manila and Washington during the government of former Philippine President Corazon Aquino, allows the alternate presence of U.S. troops, aircraft, and ships at Philippine military bases, as well as the construction of facilities for storing fuel and equipment. Manila is Washington's oldest ally in the region and also the largest recipient of U.S. military aid equipment and training. During a 2+2 meeting with his Filipino counterparts last week, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said that the 1951 Mutual Defense Agreement between the two sides continues to be the foundation of their cooperation and reaffirms it. Austin said the Mutual Defense Agreement applies to armed attacks on our aircraft or public ships of our armed forces, including the Coast Guard, anywhere in the South China Sea. So what do you guys think about this issue? Please express your thoughts in the comments. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications in order to be informed about new videos. Thank you for watching us.